Let's talk about Ukraine. Let's talk about Russia and where things stand right now in this war. And then we're going to talk about Venezuela a little bit later. Well, is Putin done with talking? Are we? Everything is done, but the bombing campaign right now. Are we done with talking? Are we done with diplomacy? Let's bring in Colonel Douglas MacGregor now to talk about where things stand in the current war. And then I want to talk about some other things with him just coming up after the break. Colonel, it seems like, well, these peace talks falling apart. Doesn't really seem to be much of an appetite for peace in the West. I don't exactly know what's happening here. This back and forth, Trump saying it's on, then it's off. This Budapest peace summit. Putin seems like he's done listening to all of these fools in the West right now. What will become of this war?
Well, the war is going to continue until the Russians end it on terms that they're happy with. I think that's been true for a long time now. There's no question about who is prevailing on the battlefield. So that's a foregone conclusion. I think what Putin was looking for was something more than a meaningless ceasefire, which would have left the Zelensky regime in power, changed nothing fundamentally inside Ukraine. What he wants, obviously, is a neutral Ukraine that's not going to present a threat to Russia in the future. I think President Trump would like to give him that. But President Trump is surrounded by people who are telling him he can't do it. And their reason is very simple. We cannot be humiliated by Russia as though we're being humiliated. President Trump needs to get back to what he said earlier. This is President Biden's war. President Biden built Ukraine up into this dangerous military monster that was trying to destroy Russia. We don't have any interest in that. We want to normalize relations with Russia. We can get along with Russia. That was Trump's mantra. He needs to get back to it. We have nothing to gain by war with Russia. We have everything to gain by establishing peace in Ukraine. And I think that's eminently achievable. But what his European allies want is for the Russians to get on their knees, beg for forgiveness, disarm themselves, and march home. That's not going to happen.
For ego reasons, why else would Europe even care about Ukraine at this point? I mean, what do you surmise? Now they are actually, let me ask you about this, because there are reports that because of the U.S. government shutdown, that Germany is paying NATO soldiers, whereas before that was the United States obligation. Is this going to wake them up? Like, oh, shoot, now we have to pay for this?
I have no idea. I know that one of the things that President Trump asked me in private in 2020 was, what do you think it will take for the Germans to invest in their own defense and create a new defense force? I said, for us to leave Germany. And he agreed. He knew that. I think what President Trump wants to do makes sense. He wants to shed our overseas obligations as much as he can. The problem is that he has no support for that inside the Beltway and the people around him. And these are the same people that want to continue to pursue Israeli hegemony at the expense of Israel's neighbors in the Middle East. They also want perpetual war with Russia. And President Trump is being told, I'm sure, if you do this, you will look weak. If you do this, you will not be seen as having, quote unquote, defeated the Russians. Well, no kidding. That's not going to happen. Russia is not going to be defeated. We need to give up on that option, and we need to do business with Russia. Ukraine is not the 51st state. We have no vital strategic interest in the place. He knows that. He's got to stand up and say it and send these other people away, but he's not doing it. He likes optics. Let's face it, he likes to look great in front of everybody. He wants to be credited with doing wonderful things. And he's afraid that if he goes and meets with Putin and says, I've had it with the Ukrainians, I'm willing to accept these boundaries, and that's what he should do. He should draw the damn boundaries. That's right. What has happened in European history for hundreds of years. You think that little countries, little groups of people on the periphery were given the opportunity to reject agreements between the great powers of Europe? Of course not. The great powers of Europe were always interested in peace. And that's what we should be interested in, peace, putting an end to this. He needs to draw the boundaries jointly with President Putin and present them and say, these are what I support. And he should also say, I am the leader of NATO. Stop sending equipment to Ukraine. Ukraine needs to clean up. It has to have elections. It has to have a new government. He's the leader of NATO. He can do that. Obviously, he's not the leader of NATO, though, because he's not doing it.
The one more question on this, and I want to pivot here after the break, but strategically, Putin's sitting there right now. The Russian army, they're about to head into a cold winter. You're tired of this back and forth. This war will continue, as you say, on their own terms. They will end it on their own terms. From a military standpoint, Colonel, what do you think the Russians are preparing for as we head into this winter? Strategically, certain cities. We know that I think the last week they just grabbed another 4 villages. In one afternoon, 550 Ukrainians were killed, eliminated, not surrendered, eliminated in just one village. So strategically, where do you think the Russians are? How are they preparing for the winter?
Well, the Russians are prepared for the winter. They're not going to freeze. They're going to be warm and comfortable. If anything, this is probably the best cared for Russian army in history. And President Putin and his generals have gone to great lengths to make sure people are living in good conditions. The issue is what happens to Ukraine in the winter. And with the destruction of the energy grid in Ukraine, and the expectation right now is that the winter in Ukraine this year will be the worst in the last 20 years. Now, forecasts are forecasts. We don't know what it'll be, but that seems to be what people are anticipating. And that means a lot of Ukrainians are going to die because they can't heat their homes. They can't heat the buildings they're in. Now, I'm sure that doesn't affect Mr. Zelensky, but the truth is that the Ukrainian people are going to suffer terribly. That's part of the strategy, to be blunt. It's not because Mr. Putin wants to kill Ukrainians. He'd rather not. He's not interested in killing Orthodox Slavs. That seems to be a specialty that Mr. Zelensky has developed. But there's no end to this until this regime in Kiev goes away. I think that's the bottom line. It will be interesting to see what the Russians are willing to do as the winter gets worse. The big advantage of winter, of course, is that the ground is frozen and it allows for better mobility. And if your enemy is freezing, he's not likely to be very robust. At this point, the Ukrainian army on the ground is in tatters. It's in chaos and destruction.